or your social security, you've got to give us your eyeball.
Well, so I was thinking about this, and hopefully Jarrett's able to join us soon. For those who don't know, Jarrett wasn't with us. He's feeling a little under the weather earlier in the week, and he's still kind of recovering. But we might, most likely, we'll see him on later. But his counter to me is Grant, travel outside the US because the rest of the world is so leery of authoritarian governments. And I thought, okay, that's a reasonable logic. You know, I'm very familiar with a lot of the oppression in Latin America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and then obviously loosely historically aware of, you know, authoritarians through history. But then I saw Sam Altman's post of the lines of people wrapped around the corner for blocks on end. Um, to get their eyeball scanned by the orb. And this isn't an Asian country. Now, Asians are no strangers to authoritarian governments. So, my question is there's obviously, is it city dwellers versus rural people that have a different paradigm? Is it, it's not developing world and underdeveloped world. It's not people that have dealt with oppression. So, like, what is the profile of an area or a community or a group that is completely willing, acknowledging privacy issues, completely willing for this? Like, what is the psychology of that? You're very familiar with the people who are anti-privacy issues or whatever it is. What's the paradigm?
I feel like that maybe the people that are lining up are maybe people that are like super into tech. Just think about it. Like if you're like you're pretty into tech, so you're kind of just like I want to be part of it.
Yeah.
So I would expect that at least for the people that are potentially lining up for this are people that are just like, oh, cool. Maybe some of the other people are like people that are so terribly off. Like they're really like got the least bits of money possible, and they're hoping that universal basic income that's being talked about
Hmm.
is going to come right away.
So do you think a lot of people who are in the pro Worldcoin camp, do you think a lot of them are like drinking the Kool-Aid on universal basic income? Because I haven't heard a single one talk about that, except you. I saw it on the list of potential roadmap stuff, but I don't hear a lot of people that are like, yay, Worldcoin. I don't hear them talking about universal basic income hardly at all.
Well, I think that there is a group of people that are thinking about it. I think maybe it's not on the forefront of everyone's minds right this minute because
Okay.
we're not seeing uh, we're not seeing everybody losing their jobs to AI right now. But I
Sure.
think it'll be something that'll come to the forefront of everybody's minds sooner than later. Uh, and the fact that it's one of Sam Altman's leverage points. It's one of his talking points.
So like
That
you've heard him talk about it more like regarding WorldCoin and
yeah,
a world ID. I have not heard him say this like even once. I need to pay better attention.
in all of the press statements that are being made about WorldCoin, UBI is something that is mentioned time and time again in every
Really?
article.
Okay, I glaze over that. So you think so when we see these long lines in his Twitter post or whatever it is, you think a major contributing, maybe not the major contributing, but a major contributing factor is these people think if I'm an early adopter, then um, I might be the first in line for some sort of UBI distribution. Did you ever expect universal basic income to come from a private company?
I never expected it.
Me neither. Like just that thought trips me out a little bit, and it's not. That's not why I'm involved. I guess I was presuming the technophile thing. Like when I saw these lines of it was some Asian country. I don't know if it was Beijing. I don't know if it was Singapore. I'm not really sure, or Taiwan possibly. What some of this footage was coming out of, and I should know. But nearly all those countries I mentioned, or any of the Asian four tigers, they are no stranger to oppressive governments regarding privacy concerns. But privacy concerns be damned, the line is still there. And so I guess I'm trying to get to the root of both sides of this argument. Privacy is a super, super concern. Hey, look, just look at someone who's had authoritarian histories. And it's like, that's not the factor. Um, but we did just see, you and I were just looking, France has now come out with an official probe into the Worldcoin and its orb and its data privacy. And we know that France frequently falls on the side of conservative views on privacy, them leading the charge with the GDPR in a huge, strong way. Our man in the tower. What's going on? Are you back? Oh yeah, he's still plugging in his audio.
Yeah, he's still connecting.
So France has been a strong voice with things like GDPR. We don't hear you. Can you hear us? No, he's chatting.
Yeah, sorry guys. It's my first time apparently streaming. I just always get that confused. How you guys doing?
Good. You doing all right? Welcome to the show. Did you get some Pedialyte? You feeling good?
I did, and I don't know what you guys are talking about, so it's kind of weird for me to talk about this, but I think it's important that everyone know that if you're not in the United States on our wonderful healthcare system, you can get stuff like ciprofloxacin or ciprofloxacin that in the United States you'd have to go to your doctor and then they would have to give you a prescription, or a doctor and they give you a prescription. You then go to the pharmacy, they're going to ask you for insurance. If you don't have, it's going to cost you $1 million. I just got these 10 tablets because I have a stomach infection for 9,200. I think it's backwards. 9,200 pesos.
They're just under $10, right? $8.
9,200 pesos is $2.50.
Oh.
So it's incredible. Yeah. So that is an advantage of being in Latin America, being able to walk to a pharmacy and just say, "Hey, this is what I need," and they just give you everything. So that's where I am right now.
Here. I need your spice. So I was just telling Aussie your argument frequently to me about, we're talking about WorldCoin and we're talking about the post that Sam Altman posted of these lines around the block. And, I thought when I saw this video or saw this footage, the first thing I thought was your counter to me all the time. Grant, that's a very privileged view. It's a very American view. Just go to countries that have had oppressive regimes. And I'm sitting here looking at this Asian footage. And I'm thinking, Asian countries are no strangers to authoritarian governments, oppressive regimes. Mm-hmm. So why? So they're fine with lines. And then Aussie's point was, well, maybe they're just technophiles. As we know, like the Japanese haven't had a lot of repressive regimes. But I thought the footage was from Beijing, and they're very familiar with Big Brother. But they're still very much a technophile society, at least in metropolitan China. But I don't know if this was there or Singapore, which is a big difference, Singapore, and Taiwan, which is a big difference. But what say you to this idea that I don't think it's countries that have had oppressive histories? And then I was pointing out that France started a probe, and France is familiar with monarchies and oppression, and so they helped lead the GDPR. And you just kind of came in right then when I was pointing out France is going to do some of these probes, and I think we're going to see a lot of these privacy probes, but I think Europe will lead us more than Asian countries that have been oppressed or Latin countries that have been oppressed. So does it change your view at all when you start thinking about, well, Asian countries have had oppression. They're still lining up around the block. What's your thought on that?
Well, I think first of all, if you look at any country and you have a couple lines of 1,000 people, it's less than a fraction of 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 a percent of the population. So to look at that and be like, see, they've been oppressed and they're doing it. I also think that when you think about authoritarianism and you think about governments that are going to be oppressive, there are still winners when that happens. There's still people that benefit from that, right?
Yeah.
In any oppressive government, there are still like the aristocrats that kind of don't understand what's actually going on in the street. They don't understand that people are being disappeared and being tortured because the government just keeps them thinking whatever. So I think it's with a grain of salt. And I also think that it's interesting that they were lining up in Beijing because, China's very much into controlling their population. So I'm interested to see how that works. And I'd love to be a fly on the wall.
I don't know if it's Beijing.
Verify that because I don't know about that. I did see lines, I think in Argentina, I want to say.
Also with the Pinochet government and other governments, yeah.
Yeah. So Pinochet was Chile. But it
I'm
was in
sorry.
and around that time. Yeah, it was in and around that time that they had another oppressive government in Argentina. That doesn't surprise me in Argentina, strictly just because of the currency devaluation. And so if people can get onto a new currency and access to a new
Mm,
currency that other people may trade, it's a survival thing. And actually, I haven't put
mm.
this up yet, but I wanted to share this, and I was going to put this on the More Than Blockchain Instagram, but I have just been not in the mood to do anything recently. And there were these. I'll read them out loud if it's okay. It's from Peter McCormick, who runs, I think, one of the best crypto or Bitcoin podcasts there is, called What Bitcoin Did. I'm sure you guys have both listened to it. He said, and so Peter McCormick's a pretty much known maxi, one of the most known voices, I think, in Bitcoin. And he says he has three tweets, and I can tag it so we can put it here if we want. He said 24 hours in Argentina and seeing how people move money around from peso to dollar, Bitcoin, dollars on shitcoin networks, it is clear that people in a currency crisis use whatever they can. Sorry, while Bitcoin is important here, so is Tether on Tron, Polygon, and Ethereum. I had dinner with 4 locals last night. All are Bitcoiners, all hold Bitcoin and understand it deeply. They all know what shitcoins are, but as they explain how people move money around, these digital dollars are super important. When he says digital dollars, he's talking about USDC, Tether. Um, he says, interesting. I asked them all how much time they spend every week doing this. He's talking about exchanging currencies and thinking about different cryptocurrencies and like, when do we swing? When do we buy? When do we sell? And he said, one explained it is essentially a second job, and about 30% of his time is managing currencies. Another 50%. The other 2 said it is all they think about. So I think in a currency crisis, when you are seeing year over year your currency devalue by 100%, if not more than even 20%, people are just going to levitate to whatever's easiest. And so if WorldCoin shows to be something that they're going to, latch onto, I think it's more of a survival thing. So to go back to your original question, I think people
Preach.
I think people are going, and I don't even know what Aussie said, but I think people are going to levitate it towards a survival, whereas the 3 of us would levitate it towards, wow, we can get our iris scanned and have a unique thing, and we're technophiles, And so I even think that like this conversation we're having in the United States is a super privileged one, because I have friends who talk to me all the time. They're trying to figure out, if they should buy Bitcoin, if they should buy real estate, if they should buy stocks. They're starting to think about retirement. They're in their 40s and their 50s. They're reaching out to me. They know that this is what I think about a lot and I have conversations about. And so it makes me feel really privileged to have this conversation, because if we decide to get into WorldCoin, it's strictly out of interest. It's out of, I want to dip my toe in the future of world finance. But for other people, they're literally doing it because this is how they think that they're going to make it to next month. So that's where we are. And I don't know. And Aussie didn't pay me to say
That's
anything.
exact. I literally said it's the UBI. They're so poorly off that the chance at UBI or any kind of payout is 1,000 times more attractive or more important than a concern about privacy, because they're just worrying about
Jared,
the next day or whether they have a job or
not. I posed that question to you, Jared, because when Aussie presented this just before you came on, my counter was surprise. I've heard this from the 2 of you. I've heard it from Aussie, but I haven't heard it from one other person talking about WorldCoin, about the UBI. I know that Sam Alton has mentioned it, but is it your impression that when you talk about survival, you're talking about the potential for universal basic income, or just the potential of taking control of currencies?
That's a really good distinction. I'm glad you've made it. I think for many people, it's just having access to a new coin that could be something that is accepted on the corner, is accepted at a bar, is accepted at a restaurant. I don't think many people, even Sam Altman, has really run through what UBI will eventually mean. I think it will mean the race to the bottom of everything. I think it will mean total dependency on a third party, whether that be the state or a private entity. I think it gets really dystopian quick. And we also have seen that unlimited printing of fiat currency doesn't go anywhere great long term. But when I'm talking about, I'm not thinking about UBI. I'm thinking about they want to be able to have access to maybe the next thing that everyone's going to want and use to exchange. I'm not thinking about UBI. UBI to me is really interesting. And I used to be super pro UBI years ago when Bernie Sanders would talk about it, because I do think that we are going to come to a place where technology is going to bring productivity to a whole new frontier where humans just don't need to be there anymore. You know, I mean, we've gone from like the Industrial Revolution, and like if you're in any probably part in the north of the industrial United States, you'll find these mills which have now been converted into lofts, they've been converted into bars, they've been converted, and they're all over. There's famously in Lowell, Massachusetts, they have the mills in Lowell, and now they're all turned into different thing, office buildings or whatever. And even in my town where I was raised in Massachusetts, we had this thing called the United Shoe. And if you can think back to the movie Jumanji with Robin Williams, as a kid, he was growing up and his father ran a shoe factory. That's exactly what this thing looks like even today. And they've gutted it. And now there's Mexican restaurants, banks, chiropractors. There's a church. There's a couple gyms, CrossFitters, because there's high ceilings. Point being, in that time, you needed someone to work six days a week, 12 hours a day, because they literally had to be on the factory. Now, we're so far away from that people are, taking their 8-hour workday and making it down to 2 with ChatGPT. I can only imagine what the future is going to bring and how we're going to need less and less humans to kind of continue to even increase productivity. So I do think that there is, and Jackie has a really interesting comment here, so I want to call it out in a sec or pass that to you. I do think in the future we are going to need to cross this bridge of how do we give people economic value so they can buy their, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, their shelter, their water, their safety, put food on the table, because we no longer have use for them. Their utility in our system no longer works. So I do think we need to probably figure that out. And if that's where this conversation goes, that's exciting. Grant, I'm going to pass it back to you because you look like you're about to go, and then maybe call out Jackie's thing.
Yeah. So, well, my thought just escaped me entirely. So I'll go right to Jackie's thing, and I'll come back to my thought there because, this was my thought. The UBI, this is an interesting conversation. You mentioned UBI and the printing of money. What you're alluding to is a government-based UBI. Sam Altman is talking about a privately driven UBI, which is not the printing of money theoretically. And to me, the parallel in my mind that it does ideally stimulate me is, what SpaceX did for spaceflight, basically cut $4 billion space flights down to $400 million each because it was privately run. They're looking for profit margins. And yay, incentivization for profit margin to the oligarchs of capitalism, right? Because we drove this price down. If UBI is in the hands of a private company, and basically it's dividends on a company's profit margins to a point, as I imagine it, there might be an insane need that maybe it's not what we know to be UBI a la Bernie Sanders. Maybe it's UBI done capitalistically, which would be quite interesting. I don't know. I'm not saying good. I'm not saying bad. It would be quite interesting. So real quick to Jackie's point, and Jackie's view definitely intrigues me. She has a good view of supply chain, of blockchain, a lot of issues that I really dig. She says Chinese are also a civilization state, which means they have a low sense of individualism, and uploading your data for the betterment of your civilization could be considered a noble act. However, it would be better for specifically Chinese advancement, which they do believe in. It would be interesting who Worldcoin benefits the most at the very top and how the Chinese feel about that. I haven't read enough, but are the Chinese authorities pro Worldcoin? And Jackie, this view 100% true, and I don't think that this is limited to China, though China probably accentuates it more than many. This worldview of communalism at a societally philosophical level is basically Easternism or Orientalism versus Occidentalism. And so in varying degrees, Japan probably being some of the most individualistic, but relative to the United States, not at all. But relative to the other four tigers, all of them, the Asian four tigers, have this element. So, and when we're talking about the Chinese, I do need to correct myself. I am not clear if the lines I saw were China, but I do believe they were Asian. And so I just want to make sure that's clear. But she does raise a great question. How do the Chinese feel? Are they pro Worldcoin? My guess is only insofar as they could control it.
I'd be surprised that they would be allowed to set up an orb in China.
I would be shocked.
I'll be 100% honest.
I would be shocked.
I'd be pretty shocked. So I'm thinking it's probably Singapore or somewhere else. Like it's probably not China. Uh, hey, Allison.
Good morning, Allison.
Good
This
morning,
is Jared's
Allison.
new room.
Actually, it's an afternoon for Allison.
It is
Like,
afternoon.
let's be realistic. She's not in our time
Yeah.
zone. It's not all about the U.S.
Jared's in his new penthouse loft, barely able to enjoy it with his stomach illness. I see you haven't even been able to put in like a love seat or anything in the window back there. You haven't been able to do much other than just have a slick pad.
That's it.
So what do we think about who will lead the security probes? I do believe France will absolutely drive this into the ground, but who else is next that we know of? Because I think France was leading the charge with GDPR out of Europe. Who else is going to follow up going, hey, what's going on with this data?
Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, likely. I wouldn't be surprised if the U.S. gets involved
In the probe?
in the probe. I think it would be unsurprising to myself to see that.
I want to answer Jackie's question directly. She said, "I haven't read enough, but the Chinese authorities pro WorldCoin. I can't imagine they are. They have worked tirelessly to be the first big nation to launch the digital currency, the digital yuan.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine that they want something else playing. They don't need an Ethereum to their Bitcoin, if that makes sense. So I don't see a way that works. But I will say you'll find out how anti China is to this idea if, for example, Taiwan or if, for example, Hong Kong has orbs because
Yeah.
they're already in a power struggle due to the
Yes.
geopolitics. So we'll find out, right? And I would even say Hong Kong and Taiwan are probably talking to OpenAI about this right now, really trying to say, do we want this or not? Because if we do, guess what? We have China who's going to obviously not enjoy that we are signing up our citizens to a private company that will have a digital currency when we want everyone to have digital yuan around the world. They want, the Colombian treasury here in Bogota, they want them to have digital yuan instead of holding dollars. So I can't imagine that they want any competition in the digital currency space. I'm going to go ahead and read Jackie's comment and then I can pass the mic. Jackie says, UBI in the age of UBI. Sorry about that. That was a mix of Spanish and English. UBI in the age of the Internet of Value could supersede a global reserve currency. I think of the U.S. WIC program, which helped families provide specific food items for children. So Worldcoin could be a consortium of products/resources that are distributed throughout Worldcoin's systems. Grant, you're shaking your head. Do you want to speak on that?
Well, several things. I do think UBI in the age of in the Internet of Value could supersede a global reserve currency, and for two reasons. Number one, if all things remaining the same, and Aussie's probably the one to speak to this in a big way. All things remaining the same, what you're saying is the U.S. dollar. And a UBI comes out, and in the Internet of Value, that mechanism supersede basically the US dollar as global reserve currency. Right now, though, we have a mega shift, as we all know, the three of us, and I say the four of us or five of us watching, Jackie and Allison and a bunch of other intelligent people that we know paying attention. We know the global reserve currency, US dollar as global reserve currency, is on shaky, shaky ground. We did a great episode I really appreciated about BRICS nations. And BRICS talking about launching its own cryptocurrency or CBDC of its own to basically say the US dollar is shaky, let's just come up with our own. And that, as we know, includes Russia and China and India, right? Like, I mean, the BRICS nations is not an insignificant, third child. It's a big representation. And then we also know that the Chinese yuan is making a play, has been making a play for decades in Africa of labor investment and capital investments and calling that shit due. And so we've seen several countries announce getting off the US dollar as a global reserve currency. So my only point here is not only could UBI do this, because that's interesting as we pivot to that sort of thing, but also because there's push and pull. And the pull on this is that current global reserve currency systems are shaky in general. And holdouts, I think, like the three of us, are still waving the crypto flag going, maybe there's a crypto solution or a DAO solution that helps us through or that steps in. But I think that UBI might be the component there. George Pate, what up, gangsters? Shout out to George Pate, who helped a fellow Floridian change a tire, and instead of taking money, gave him the most valuable thing in return he could have, and tried to orange pill a guy on the side of the highway. But Aussie, what do you think about Jackie's comment here? UBI superseding global reserves. What are you thinking?
I mean, it's definitely a possibility. UBI actually, it kind of makes me think about the Russian CBDC that was just announced, because UBI could be the one thing that gets paid out in a digital CBDC.
It might require payouts as a CBDC. Yeah.
As a CBDC, and in the discussions about the digital ruble from Russia, they're talking about using it to limit what people can purchase with it. So maybe, you know, you go to the grocery store, you can't buy booze. Like your digital ruble won't allow you to buy booze, or your UBI won't allow you to buy booze, but you can buy toilet paper, water, whatever else.
So this U.S. WIC program, are you familiar with the WIC program?
I'm not, but I've got a feeling it's pretty similar to like a basic food
stamps
supplement program. Yeah.
And it became EBT, and EBT was done on cards, and it was required to be done with something that amounted to like a Visa card, right? That had money put on it. And I do think that might be the interesting thing, but remember, all of us keep answering and speaking to UBI from the one context we've heard the most of it from. All of our answers were tainted with this idea of a government-controlled UBI. I'm actually excited that, whoa, wait a minute, all of our fears of government authoritarianism or control, like what you're saying with I can't go buy beer because I'm getting all this control. What if UBI was privately run? Would they insist on us using some form of digital dollar? I mean, what's your thought there, Jared?
Yeah, I think you're right. My predication is that the government would provide this type of service, and I like that Jackie called out the WIC, which then turned, I believe, into Snap, and now it's changing a name again because whatever.
Yep.
But what I understand from what Sam Altman has kind of, I almost called him Sam Altman-Fried.
I've actually seen that joke being made several times now. Sam Altman is our new SBF.
Yeah, Sam Altman-Fried. That's going to stick.
It is.
So Sam Altman-Fried, I've actually heard that what he's trying to do, and Aussie called this out last time. He's like, here's the poison, right? I'm going to sting you, here's the rattlesnake to the neck, and now I have the antidote. And you'll give up whatever, because in about 2 minutes, if you don't, you're going to go into shock. And so the rattlesnake to the neck is the AI, the growing AI conversations to the global economy and the overall labor force. And then here you have 30 seconds to 2 minutes where you go into shock. All you have to do is scan your eye, give me this, and then I'll start giving you money. I do think it is an interesting idea to say, okay, if we believe that AI is going to affect labor markets in all these sectors by X% over the next 3 to 5 years, we then need to figure out a way to give people value so they can go inject that into their own lives, to put food on the table, to put a roof over their head, right? I do think that's an interesting premise. And I do think it breaks the mold of traditional UBI conversations. I wonder if there's a way to do UBI with crypto and blockchain, and this is dangerous to even say, like you said, Grant, to obviously limit to what you can buy, just like the WIC program. You can't go to a dispensary with your Snap card, right, in the States. But, have a time limit. So say you have a month. So that way, even though you're increasing the supply, it does have a fecha de vencimiento. Like it's going to be null and void. Like that money is created and then disappeared within a month if you don't use it. And I don't know how that works. I wouldn't know how that works, but I just think from any standpoint of printing money, we literally know that that's not going to work long over the long run. I'm going to read Jackie's comment past the mic there, but I do think that you're right. Most of our premises are predicated on the idea of the government being the one that would issue the UBI payments. Jackie said WIC is also heavily regulated, so you couldn't just go buy cheese. It was cheese that contained a certain percent of dairy, for example. Exactly, something else that's government subsidized. It was very specific and limited. Now apply that to UBI and products that are tied to a specific supply chain, like One Belt Road, for example. Exactly. And this is where I think it gets really interesting. And that's how I don't know where Sam Altman-Fried, I love it, where WorldCoin would support. Because in Jackie's example, and this is true, a lot of the SNAP and WIC programs, they will support other government subsidized things, whether that's
other programs that they're pushing forward, other agendas.
Right, the dairy industry and the meat industry primarily are like the two, and the sugar industry, right? Like we want you to buy these things, so we keep the money all in La Familia. But once you have Sam Altman-Fried who's saying, you know, Aussie, here's your $500, here's your 500 world coins per month. Is he then get like partnerships from like the U.S. dairy industry, and they give him $20 billion a year, so that way he says you can only go buy milk?
I would see that they do. I don't necessarily that it's 20. They give Sam Altman $20 billion.
Or they give him a cut,
but they tie his AI into the system, and his AI then gets a cut from the fact that it's integrated into all of their system automation, and all of a sudden, Sam Altman is in every industry that he wants to be, and can choose essentially which companies are most productive or least productive, because they either get access to the AI or they don't, and they subsidize with UBI who they buy from and who they don't.
Well, and you know, we're calling it UBI. If we were being careful, we'd probably pivot that to actually call it dividends. Because if it's private and it's monetary distributions, the government will likely clamp down. And when I picture the chess match going on here, the government likes to dangle, the Democratic government likes to dangle UBI as a temptation for people to continue to vote for the party, though they don't have the kinks figured out. We do have programs like WIC, but the push and pull in Congress says, okay, we'll let this happen, but you gotta give love to my dairy lobby. And it's like, okay, well, these cheeses, not those cheeses. And that's not a government thing. That's a human incentive thing. We're the fuckers in control giving you shit. So here's our other, you scratch my back too. And so now you just have that same play happen at the private sector. I just happen to know that the motives are clearly understood. No, I didn't say pure motives. I said the motives are clearly understood when it's in a private company's hands. And so when Sam Altman comes along and says UBI, it's actually dividends. But what I foresee is this, the chess match I see unfolding is they do that, and then the government says, we're going to shut you down unless. And then the negotiations start. So now you have a SpaceX supplanting NASA, so long as the CIA and NSA and the government have special contracts for payloads. So SpaceX comes in, does things on the cheap, but also gets the same contract levels, and suddenly they're a highly profitable company. They just happen to be privately held. Here comes Sam Altman, hashtag Sam Altman-Fried. I foresee a similar chess match going on where he says, hey, listen, look at our profit margins from our Bing contract for ChatGPT, from our DALL-E contract in APIs. We are a stupid profitable company. If you're on WorldCoin, we're going to start distributing $50, $100 in dividends, UBI. Government comes along and says, why don't you manage our UBI? On contract, you have the same incentivizations come in, and maybe they then have negotiating power to say, let's do dairy. But what's unique about this is now Sam, who is very versed in crypto, has a potential to seriously look at things like DAOs, to seriously negotiate other things like insurances. So he's in a super powerful position that could unfold. Roger, yo, my guys, the three amigos. Yeah, man, only because Jarrett decided to show up. So I guess my real point is I see a model that could mirror SpaceX because it's such the discussion of UBI, we can't help but talk about it as a societal initiative, aka a social program, but done at the private level. What was your thought there, Jarrett? I saw you nod.
Yeah, I want to ask you guys, I want to shift the conversation. I want to continue to talk about AI because I
Yeah.
think it's a very important thing. And I know this is not Crypto Bros, and we normally talk about crypto kind of
It's
exclusively.
Friday though.
Yeah, it's Friday, and AI obviously is already part of crypto, and it's going to continue to take a bigger part of crypto. But there was this cringe-worthy video I saw of a guy, and he's just walking around. It looks like New York City, and he walks up to people, and he asks them what they do, and this woman says what she does, and he says, "No." I think he starts by saying, "Hey, are you worried about AI taking your job?" And she says emphatically, "No." And he says, "All right, well, what do you do?" And she does like partnerships. I'm not even sure. She's like, "Well, I work with people, and that's not going to be replaced." And he goes, "Okay, well, what are the specific things you do you think aren't going to get replaced?" And everything she says, there's literally already an AI product. You just have to know where they are, put them together, get some APIs. Stuff's still really dispersed and it's so new, and there's new products literally coming out every day. And by the end of it, after about 2 minutes, she's like, maybe I should look for a new job." My question to you guys, it's a cringeworthy video. My question to you guys is, how are you approaching this personally? And then how are you approaching it with other people? And I'll give you an example. I am in Colombia, and in Colombia, just like every other place on the planet, maybe, but in Colombia, if you have a building in Bogota and you live in a building in Bogota, um, 95% of the time, you're going to have someone that is a doorman who's down in the bottom of the thing. They put the security lock on, they take it off. When you walk out, they open it up. It's different from the United States. Like, for example, in New York City, the only way you have a doorman is if you are living in a very nice building. Here, that's not the case, depending upon even the economic status you are. Like, most people do have this, and I always like, you really get to know the doormen by happenstance because you see them so often. And at the last building I was at before I moved to this apartment, I really got to talking to one of the doormen who actually bought Bitcoin, which was really cool. And we were talking a little bit, and I was asking him about his family, and he's like, "Yeah, my daughter, she's like 23, 24. She's at university." And I'm like, "Oh, well, what is she what is she studying?" And he's like, "Oh, she's doing languages. So I think she's into French and English, and she obviously speaks Spanish."
Oof.
And he was like, "Yeah, she already works at a call center. So that means her English is like very good." And I was like, "Well, what does she want to do?" And he's like, "Well, she makes really good money at the call center. So she wants to like work her way up there." And it was at this point where I didn't go into my AI diatribe, but I almost did, because I feel like she's going to be replaced in 2 years. Some of the AI products I've seen for customer service that have come out, and I've seen a couple shared on LinkedIn, they're crazy. Like, they're really, 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 really good. We got some good comments here. We'll shout out in a sec. But I guess my question for you guys and anyone and anyone listening is, how are you starting to approach the internal conversation of, is AI going to replace me? And then how often do you interject when people talk about what they're doing about AI replacing them? And I think more so this is with younger people. Like, when I see people that are going to go study like graphic design, I'm like, I don't know about that. I with Canva and the new AI things, I can do anything I want, and you can get a degree, that's cool, but I can also just do it in Canva. So anyways, how are you guys, if you want to talk about yourselves, but also how are you engaging with people when they talk about the things that they're doing to stay competitive in the job market moving forward, and you're like, that's already replaceable?
What you got, Aussie? You leaned in.
I'm thinking to myself, I've been kind of positioning myself in a way, because I'm one of those young people you think about. Although I've already gotten my degrees. I've been kind of trying to position myself in spots where I think adoption will be slow, where there's certain security or private, like security concerns, that using an open source software like AI will probably not be a top, like will be a concern. So will make it harder to replace, until they can get AI to a point where they feel it meets national security protocols. And then kind of positioning myself in roles where there's a chance that there is enough of like stakeholder relations or stakeholder management that essentially makes it very more difficult to do it via AI rather than person to person. So that's kind of how I've been positioning myself. I haven't had the conversations with my brothers or anybody else, but that's because I haven't seen them. So
So I'm viewing this a little differently. I have a strong entrepreneurial view of this, which means I pay very close attention to motivations and incentivizations. Um, I am very enamored. I am a technophile. I have the ability to head down to Miami. I'm going to probably do this in the next week or so. Get scanned by Sam Altman's board. I don't even flippin' care. But all that said, um, I am not fooled that AI will bring about universal basic income. Not in the least. That's bullshit. Don't let anyone believe it. I do not believe AI will disrupt hear me on this. I'll say it and then I'll correct it. I don't believe AI will replace a single job. Grant, we're already seeing it. No, we're not. We're seeing people use AI at targeted niches in specific ways, and that is removing the need for the bloat in jobs. And I know that it means the same thing, but I think we need to become nuanced in how we talk about it. AI, like, did the motor car replace horses and buggies? No, it didn't just show up and push people off horses and run over horses. It was the salespeople and the niche industries that made it make sense. And so what I'm seeing, boots on the ground, and the reason I'm saying this is I'm heavily involved in several co-working spaces in my area, and you guys have seen, but not everyone else has. I've attended several panels and have spent hours talking to people how they're using AI. They cannot fathom, the average small business owner cannot fathom how to use it. But this is what I always say, playing the devil's advocate on both sides. That's not the disruption. In my field, specifically my main income is my website company. That's my main bread and butter, residual income, if you will, or recurring revenue in my life is the website company. We're definitely concerned about AI, but not because AI is going to build the greatest websites ever in the next 2 years. Because the public's perception of the value of a website will change in the next 2 years. Because they're thinking, can't you click and create a website? So why would I pay you to do this for the next 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 hours? And Jarrett, you've dabbled with website design. We know that anyone could drag and drop Squarespace, but they don't, which is why you charge what you charge. Anyone can drag and drop Whips and Weebly, but they don't, which is why we charge what we charge. Those incentivizations won't change, but the public's perception that you're in Squarespace and you click a single button and generates an entire website. Some of that already exists. I saw a new one come out today that we're testing. But the technology is even at its accelerated rate, it's not good enough for a brand or a message. So the masses will always get by with the cheapest thing. And those SaaS products will happen, and that will shake off the young Susie Q who just graduated art college and says, I'm going to start a web design company. She was going to fail anyway in the next 9 months. She's going to fail in 4 months now. That's the only difference. But the public perception of the value will rock web design agencies. I don't want to pay you $4,000. Can I pay you $2,000? Well, we're going to have to innovate our services and either go up market or start reselling the new tech. So for me, it's not the hard tech that's actually doing it. It's what the public mistakenly thinks about the AI that changes the market. Does that nuance make sense, at least in web design?
In web design, it makes sense. I agree that there is some quote unquote bloat within the market where we're going to find new cost saving ways to make things profitable, but it doesn't supplant the fact that then we've got a human problem of there's too many people, not enough jobs, unless everybody is going back to picking oranges.
Sure.
Because right now I'm actually not even going to be like mince my words on it. We import South Americans for 3 months a year to come pick our fruit in different parts of the country.
Yeah. Yeah.
So any Joe, are we saying now any Joe Blow, Grant, you're going to pick my oranges now because because
Not from getting UBI
AI
from Sam.
supplanted. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to. I think Grant. I think your idea here is interesting. That the perception is different from the reality, and people's perception of the value. Because what you're talking about is price, value, and cost.
Yes.
And you and I have discussed this a lot. And when it does come to websites, I do think it's going to be interesting. For me, when I build a website, for example, or someone, and I only use Squarespace exclusively. It's the platform I feel most comfortable on, and I'm currently building one right now. Hope to launch in September. Anyone could do it, right? Anyone could figure out how to do it. If I just basically, when I started in 2017, spent 50 to 60 hours on YouTube in tutorials, figured out how to do it, rocked it. The biggest thing that they're really paying for is me to change, basically swap the domain in and update some DNS settings and hold their hand through that process, because it can be rocky when your website's down for 24 hours. Just because the security, basically the internet is re-recognizing this as the new address for your building, essentially. That's really what they're paying for. And then they're paying for my support along that way to just kind of like give my 2 cents. I'm interested in what you're saying, though. The AI hasn't taken jobs yet, because I think if we rewind over the last, and I'm 36, so over the last 36 years of my life, maybe we weren't calling it AI. Maybe it was algorithms.
Sure.
Maybe it was electronics, whatever. In 100 years, everyone's going to look back at that and they're just going to say, oh, that was AI. But I grew up, and when I was 14, I started bagging groceries at a grocery store. By 15, I was able to do, I made it to, do the ringer. And at that point, you literally looked at, actually, this is what it looked like. You had a little stamp like this, and I would say, okay, 9,200. So I'd literally put in 9,200, and then I would choose pharmacy, right? And then the banana would come across, and it would have a PLU, and I'd type in that number, weigh it, and then say produce. Literally, I mean, this is very old school. And so I'm highly aware now when I go to my local supermarket, and there's still 15 lanes, but only one of them's open because most people are going through the auto checkout.
Yeah.
Now, I still go through, and I will wait 20 minutes to make the point that I will still go through the human, because I'm highly aware that those jobs are going, and those people that rely on those jobs, they're not going to be able to work for Facebook.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's probably not in their cards. That's not the resume that professionally they've built. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think our perception of what tech has taken is whether we call it AI or not, in most parts of the United States, you used to go through, I remember as a kid, there's the Tobin Bridge in Boston. And whenever we'd go over it, we'd wait in line, and then you'd get up, and then you'd have $1, and you'd give the guy $1, he'd give you back 50 cents, and you'd keep it moving. Toll people don't exist.
Yeah.
They don't exist anymore. Right? Now, you could call that AI.
I
you
still
can
have
call it
toll people.
algorithms. Well, Canada's Canada. But in Massachusetts and in many parts of the United States, we don't have toll people anymore, because you just go through and you have your fast pass, it scans, or they take a picture of your license plate, and then you get, you can either be in their system and pay with your credit card or however you want to do it. The point is, whether we call it AI or not, tech is taking jobs. Now, I think the question is whether it's the perception of the reality, because for many people, the perception is the reality.
Sure.
So it's kind of like splitting hairs. I think you and I get the nuance, and Aussie does. But I think the bigger question is it going to create more jobs than it takes, and at what speed? And also, because my biggest worry is that it's going to, for example, and Grant's looking for a book. This is great. My biggest worry is that it's going to take jobs, for example, like the person who's still ringing groceries at anywhere in the world. And then the job it's going to create is going to be some prompt AI, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And those are just two different skill sets. So it's like taking the basketball out of my hands, right? And it's like, you can't play anymore. You now have to be able to 360 dunk if you want to continue to play basketball. And that to me is really dangerous. I don't know if you guys got the analogy. The point is, if it takes jobs from people with certain skills and then doesn't create jobs for those people with certain skills, and that happens too quick, that to me is my biggest worry. Whether it's the perception or the reality,
that's why I was
I'm not
talking
sure.
about the picking oranges.
The picking oranges, exactly.
Why are
exactly.
you worried
Because
about
the people
it?
that are ringing groceries are, what they're going to do is they're going to scale down. They likely don't have the ability to scale up. So they're going to go to, picking oranges.
Why does this,
or whatever.
I mean, you guys recognize, Jarrett, what you described, and also Aussie, you with oranges and stuff, even though now we have AI-empowered drones that are picking apples. I saw a great video on this, and they're going to scale markets soon. So your South Americans are going to have to stay where they're at pretty soon. But what you're saying, I agree with the mechanism of what you're saying, Jarrett. Like, it's taking jobs, but is it adding jobs? And the scale historically is never equal, because we're not talking about AI. Let's take it up a level to the meta level and say technology disruption. And the one I grabbed is a very famous one, The Innovator's Dilemma. If you've not read this, I highly recommend it. It talks about technology curves and displacements. And he was the one that really made famous, he didn't invent, but made famous the idea of creative destruction. Basically, disrupt yourself before anyone else does. If you see AI and don't know anything about it, it does not matter what business you're in, learn it. It doesn't matter if you even have profit margin making moves with that technology, use it, because that level of information will disrupt you eventually, and you might as well disrupt yourself. But the scales, you're talking about these scales. Did we remove 10 jobs? Well, did we add 10 jobs? That's moot, because it's never happened that a technology comes in, and the technology that disrupts is very rarely the technology that restores. Usually it's a derivative technology. So we got this very broad-facing, brutal, not razor-sharp AI coming in and disrupting social media massively, content creation massively, editing massively, video. Descript is like massively disrupting video editors. I don't need a big, expensive video editor. I was part of 3 workshops in the last 2 weeks about how AI was doing content and stuff. So these people, let's just say hypothetically, are losing jobs. Sure. So what do those people do in a real life cycle? They do what Aussie and Jarrett, you're both talking. They either upskill, downskill, or die. They become homeless, drop out of the system, or they downskill, become homesteaders, which is very possible. They become farmers. They take a trade. And the trades are paying very well, or they upskill. They learn to be a prompt engineer. They do something like this. But those aren't even the jobs. Those are leveraged jobs in of themselves, and they're not restoring. Someone then stumbles and builds the next unicorn, and that technology is user-facing and user-ready. And then there's a bunch of other Me Too companies, and that new booming industry, like cars to the horse and buggy whips. It wasn't just Ford, it was Ford itself for the first decade, but then came the Me Too companies that started jumping on board with that and going from there. So I don't think it's tit for tat. I don't think it's even. I think there's a delay, I guess, in the disruption. And I'm going to guess it's 10 years before we find a replacement technology, a replacement industry, or a replacement fulfillment of work. And that's the thing that people don't get, that I think that we're scratching at. This disruption is creating a moat between these options. It used to be like, well, I used to manage all these horses. Now I'm going to go to the manufacturing line, and there's plenty of that. Well, that was the industrial shift. The industrial shift demanded this even scale. Well, look at all these guys that were busting Broncos. They could go start hammering steel. We needed like 1 for 1 there. But this is truly leverage, where it's like, I got rid of 100 jobs and I hired 20. And the moat is huge of like, well, where's the next replacement? It ain't there. You're either a prompt engineer making $200K a year and those jobs are rare, or you're downskilling. To what? I'm not going to be scanning groceries. No one needs that either. So there is a problem coming. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that one of the other things that's really interesting too is that, and this is something that Andy Bryant talks about on my podcast, More Than Blockchain, and he comes on every 3 months to just talk about AI because he's in AI. And one of the interesting things I think is that a company, as it grows, right, will bring on more people. That's the theory of like how a company grows. And Demondis talked about this. I can't think of his first name on Tom Bly. Yeah, Peter Diamandis on Tom Bly's podcast. And I think I've already mentioned it here once, but it's like the idea that, the next $1 billion company that will come out in the next 6 to 12 months is going to be made by 3 dudes.
Yeah.
3 ladies, 3 people, 3 human beings, because they're going to be able to leverage AI. And I think that that's a really interesting thing, because the idea used to be that you take money and you could spend it, but it's better to invest it. And this is why the real estate industry gets so many benefits from the government, because when you're investing that money, you're basically making more capital, and you're going to tie more people into the supply chain. If Grant has $100,000 and spends it on a week cruise around the world in a catamaran or whatever, and maybe not a week, that's great. That money's dead. If Grant takes that money and buys 3 rental properties, well, then those rental properties are going to need new roofs eventually. They're going to need plumbers. So that creates a ripple effect of economy. But I think with AI, the thing that I'm starting to see more is something that Andy talked about, Peter Diamandis talked about, is the idea that like companies will now grow and they don't need more labor.
Yeah.
That's another thing.
Yeah.
And so
they might need a bit more labor, but they just need someone that knows how to leverage ChatGPT well enough to be
point.
5 people.
Sure. But that's exactly the point where Grant's like, I fired at a 100-person company, I fired 80 people and I kept 20 people. Well, guess what? Those 20 people are eventually going to give me the output of 40 to 60 with AI. And we have just a better strategy. So we're cutting the fat out of the company. Like, the top 20%, the bottom 20% or 20 people from that company didn't need to be around anyway. But as the company grows, instead of bringing on 5 people every quarter, they only need to bring on 1 person. And that's an 80% drop in growth quarter on quarter. It would actually be more compounded. But that idea to me is crazy, because that throws off the way we think about growth. Because right now, as politicians, they say, well, I created this many jobs. Even the Fed the other day, Jerome Powell, he's like, well, people are going back to work. People are spending money. That's really helping the economy. Well, even if you downgrade by 5 to 10% of the amount of jobs you need for growth to increase by like 1% GDP, that is millions of people affected, right? It's probably the hundreds of thousands of people that aren't in jobs, but then it's the millions of families that don't have food, that they can't pay their rent. And that trickle effect, I mean, the compounding of 1 to 2% annually is dangerous even over a 10-year period when we're talking about growth and how we understand it. So I do think, I guess what I'm trying to say is the current paradigm we have around labor, growth, and economic growth is just thrown to the wolves because of the changes of AI. Because things will be able to grow exponentially without the inputs of human time. And that is we've never had that before in human history.
But the idea, yes. And I think the idealists in this space, and I wouldn't say I am up to my neck in this, but I am wading in this concept, as it were, is the Star Trek idea. So I worked for a bunch of real estate millionaires in 2007. They had built a ton of money. And for those who know their history, they know what was coming in 2008. But in 2007, everyone was riding pretty high. And they were spending close to $100,000 a month on labor, on borrowed money, and leveraged money, right? And again, in hindsight, this seems obvious. But at the time, the idea and the philosophy was, if we invest enough in people learning and in people having the creative space and time to not necessarily even upskill, but to do synthetic learning, that is where the ideas and the answers and the profitability and the new businesses and the new things will come from. This is the Star Trek methodology. If we had a food replicator and basically universal basic provisions, not just income, then the idea is well, Grant's going to go surfing. He's going to say, fuck it. Like, he's not a millionaire, but he doesn't also have to pay many of his bills. So what will he do? He'll go surf. He'll go write books. There will be a creative arts movement, which we've seen the first vestiges of this with NFTs and a lot of creative Web3 art. But that might extend further into writing books and ideating. And then now we're going to play with AI and play with automations. And that is where the 3-person billion-dollar company will come from. So that's the ideal, and I don't know how likely that is. I think that'll be the exception that proves the rule of a lot of misery that people will experience, in all honesty. Of those who don't know what to say, go ahead, Aussie. What's your thought there?
Well, so actually, we have seen a whole bunch of like studies, especially out of Sweden. There was a couple studies around UBI. And the creative and the entrepreneurship that came out of that was astounding.
Far different from the UBI experiments that went on in Southeast LA. where not much to show. There were some interesting stories, but they were exceptions that proved a very miserable rule. And so I wonder if context matters. And I hate to say that because someone could read me wrong and say, well, Grant's being racist on a demographic or Grant's being limiting on a psychographic. But the studies are divided because I hadn't heard about the Netherlands studies, but even the American studies have been split. Depending on where UBI takes place, the outcomes are radically different and unpredictable. So context matters. And I don't think it's class. I don't think it's a bunch of people in poverty. I think is this particular community entrepreneurial focused? Are they gardeners? Like in your area, Austin, you guys are working on a pond. What if you didn't have to clock in for your remote jobs, and because most of your basic needs were met, and you just kept going with the pond you were putting in and the farm you were putting in and the cows, and you just knew that for the cushion, Medicare or medical needs, some extra grocery needs, some gas needs, but you could just work the garden. I think context matters significantly.
Yeah, I mean, I would do that, and we'd probably be doing Not Crypto Bros if I could get all of you available 5 times a week.
Yeah.
Aussie just finished the episode by pitching us on UBI so we can do this more than what he just did. It was so well
You know how
played.
many DJs
You should go be the PR for Sam Altman.
Well, guys, I think
You would have to give me like a ridiculous amount of money to go be the PR person for Sam Altman.
I don't think
But-
so.
me,
I think you'd go. I think you'd go for a little amount of money, Aussie. I think he's got you.
Yeah, it wouldn't take much for me, man. That's for sure. Guys, good episode. This did turn into Financial Freedom Fridays. I didn't expect it to, but I'm glad it did. Jared, I'm glad you're back. I hope your
I'm
stomach.
kind of back. I'm still feeling.
Ugh. How much longer do you
I
have
still
on
feel-
recovery?
I don't know. I mean, well, I just started taking the ciprofloxacin, and I've taken Cipro many times because
Yeah.
I've lived in. I lived a lot of time in Guatemala, and you can't drink the water there, and so I had a lot of GI issues. It might be a TMI, but I am a seasoned pro at Cipro, so I think by hopefully the 3rd dose, which will be tomorrow morning, I should probably be feeling better. And I fly back to the States tomorrow, so I'm really hoping to feel better for the flight.
Oh, yeah. Is it an early flight? Will you be sleeping?
No, it's probably the best flight I've ever gotten back. So it leaves at 2 and it gets in at 9. It's a direct. It's amazing. So
Man. Well, Cipro is every missionary's best friend. It's every person who's
is.
ever even looked at a book that mentioned Giardia's friend. It's
it is. If you don't know Cipro, you'd never really been anywhere.
Have you
There's my full
traveled?
take on that. Have you traveled? Have you been on a dirt road?
Hey, bro, let me tell you something that actually worked for me for 4 years. I never had a single waterborne illness problem ever in Haiti. Oregano oil. I would take it, and that stuff will make you hack. Like, but I took it with every swig of water I ever had in Haiti.
Did you?
For 4 years. And
I'll have to pull some down. I mean, this is the first time I've had this type of issue in Colombia. There's actually a bug going around, and I posted about this, but like my buddy in the States had about 2 weeks of the same thing, just like constantly going to the bathroom, not feeling well. Other people in Bogota have similar things. They've been out of work for like 2 weeks.
Wow.
The entire FC Barcelona team, where they're in the States right now doing their US tour, they had to cancel a game, which is rare because half their team was just with a gastrointestinal virus. So there's something definitely going around. And so it's not just like a one-off, and it's not just me. Cause I think for a while I was like, oh, I got to muster this. I got to like get to work, but I've been in and out and off this show for a week and a half, 2 weeks now. So
Don't mess.
anyways,
Don't mess
it's good to be back, but yeah, still kind of sweating a little.
Any shout outs, Aussie? Or are you good?
I'm good. I don't have any shoutouts that I can think of right now.
All right. Well, shout out to my Turo leaseor. My other car is unavailable to me right now. I rented a Turo for the next month and a half, and I think I'm gonna go surfing. So
Nice.
do you guys know James Cantor, the Weather Channel guy, the guy who's like always in the midst of the storm? Like, this guy's got a meme of his own, James Cantor. I know that surf is good when he shows up on the east coast of Florida and be like, there's a storm off the coast. I'm like, it's time to go surfing. There's James Cantor. So my shout out to James Cantor. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. Roger, Jackie, who else did? Allison dropped by. Thanks everyone for stopping by. Catch us next Tuesday at what time? 3:30? 3:30.
3:30